Buddhism in Central Asia refers to the forms of Buddhism that existed in Central Asia, which were historically especially prevalent along the Silk Road. The history of Buddhism in Central Asia is closely related to the Silk Road transmission of Buddhism during the first millennium of the Common Era. History. Buddhist monastic groups. A number of early Buddhist schools were historically prevalent throughout Central Asia. A number of scholars identify three distinct major phases of missionary activities seen in the history of Buddhism in Central Asia, which are associated with the following sects: Dharmaguptaka, Sarvastivada, Mulasarvastivada. The Dharmaguptaka made more efforts than any other sect to spread Buddhism outside India, to areas such as Afghanistan, Central Asia, and China, and they had great success in doing so. Therefore, most countries which adopted Buddhism from China also adopted the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya ordination lineage for bhiksus and bhiksanis. According to A.K. Warda, in some ways in those East Asian countries the Dharmaguptaka sect can be considered to have survived to the present. Warda further writes, it was the Dharmaguptakas who were the first Buddhists to establish themselves in Central Asia. They appear to have carried out a vast circling movement along the trade routes from Aparanta northwest into Iran and at the same time into Udayana. After establishing themselves as far west as Parthia, they followed the Silk Route, the east-west axis of Asia, eastwards across Central Asia and on into China, where they effectively established Buddhism in the 2nd and 3rd centuries A.D. The Mahisasakas and Kasyapayas appear to have followed them across Asia into China. For the earlier period of Chinese Buddhism, it was the Dharmaguptakas who constituted the main and most influential school, and even later the Vinaya remained the basis of the discipline there. In the 7th century CE, Yijing grouped the Mahisasaka, Dharmaguptaka, and Kasyapaya together as subsects of the Sarvastivada, and stated that these three were not prevalent in the 5 parts of India, but were located in the some parts of Udayana, Khotan, and Kutcha. Greco Buddhism. Buddhism in Central Asia began with the syncretism between Western classical Greek philosophy and Indian Buddhism in the Hellenistic successor kingdoms to Alexander the Great's empire, spanning modern Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. See Greco Buddhism and Dewan. The later Kushan Empire would adopt the Greek alphabet, Greco-Buddhist art forms and coinage, and Greco-Buddhist religion of these Hellenistic kingdoms. The first anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha himself are often considered a result of the Greco-Buddhist interaction. Before this innovation, Buddhist art was aniconic. The Buddha was only represented through his symbols. This reluctance towards anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha, and the sophisticated development of aniconic symbols to avoid it, seem to be connected to one of the Buddha's sayings, reported in the Nikaya, that discouraged representations of himself after the extinction of his body, probably not feeling bound by these restrictions, and because of their cult of form. The Greeks were the first to attempt a sculptural representation of the Buddha. In many parts of the ancient world, the Greeks did develop syncretic divinities that could become a common religious focus for populations with different traditions. A well-known example is the syncretic god Serapis, introduced by Ptolemy I in Egypt, which combined aspects of Greek and Egyptian gods. In India as well, it was only natural for the Greeks to create a single common divinity by combining the image of a Greek god king with the traditional attributes of the Buddha. Many of the stylistic elements in these first representations of the Buddha point to Greek influence. The Greek himation, the halo, the contrapposto stance of the upright figures, the stylized Mediterranean curly hair and top knot apparently derived from the style of the Belvedere Apollo, and the measured quality of the faces, all rendered with strong artistic realism. Some of the standing Buddhas were sculpted using the specific Greek technique of making the hands and sometimes the feet in marble to increase the realistic effect, and the rest of the body in another material. Foucher especially considered Hellenistic freestanding Buddhas as the most beautiful and probably the most ancient of the Buddhas, assigning them to the 1st century BC and making them the starting point of the anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha. Kushan Empire. When King Kanishka came to power in 78 AD in Central Asia, a new system of chronology was adopted, replacing the chronology from the era of the Seleucids. During the Kushan period, various religious systems were widespread in Central Asia. These were the local cult of Mitra and Anahit, Zoroastrian pantheon, the Greek pantheon, and the cult of local heroes. The followers of Buddhism had been banished from Iran in the 2nd–3rd centuries and found support in Central Asia, where Buddhism became widely practiced. According to Chinese chronicles, Buddhism came to China in 147 from the country of the Big Udzhi, and thanks to the Kushan missionaries, Buddhism was adopted as the official religion of the court of the Chinese emperor, Emperor Wan of Han. During the archaeological excavations in Khwarezm and Sogd, it was found out that many settlements and castles dated back to the Kushan period, but the largest number of traces of Buddhist culture during the Kushan period was found in Tolharistan. Architectural fragments dating back to the Kushan period have been found in old terms. Some Buddhist monuments date back to the period of the Great Kushans. In the middle of the 2nd century, the Kushan Empire under King Kanishka expanded into Central Asia and went as far as taking control of Kashgar, Khotan and Yarkand in the Tarim Basin, modern Xinjiang. As a consequence, cultural exchanges greatly increased, and Central Asian Buddhist missionaries became active shortly after in the Chinese capital cities of Luoyang and sometimes Nanjing, where they particularly distinguished themselves by the translation work. They promoted both Hinayana and Mahayana scriptures. Khotan. The ancient kingdom of Khotan was one of the earliest Buddhist states in the world and a cultural bridge across which Buddhist culture and learning were transmitted from India to China. Its capital was located to the west of the modern city of Khotan. The inhabitants of the kingdom of Khotan, like those of early Kashgar and Yarkand, spoke the Iranian Sakha language. Available evidence indicates that the first Buddhist missions to Khotan were carried out by the Dharmaguptaka sect. The Khotan Dharmapada. Some orthographical devices of Khotanese and the not yet systematically plotted Gandhari loanwords in Khotanese betray indisputably that the first missions in Khotan included Dharmaguptakas and used the Kharosthi written Gandhari. Now all other manuscripts from Khotan, and especially all manuscripts written in Khotanese, belong to the Mahayana, are written in the Brahmi script, and were translated from Sanskrit. By the 3rd century CE, it appears that some Mahayana texts were known in Khotan, as reported by the Chinese monk Zhou Shixing. When in 260 AD, the Chinese monk Zhou Shixing chose to go to Khotan in an attempt to find original Sanskrit sutras. He succeeded in locating the Sanskrit Prajnaparamita in 25,000 verses and tried to send it to China. In Khotan, however, there were numerous Hinayanists who attempted to prevent it because they regarded the text as heterodox. Eventually, Zhou Shixing stayed in Khotan, but sent the manuscript to Liaoyang, where it was translated by a Khotanese monk named Mokshala. In 296, the Khotanese monk Gautamiputra came to Chang'an with another copy of the same text. When the Chinese monk Faxian traveled through Khotan, he recorded that everyone there was Buddhist. According to his accounts, there were 14 main monasteries, and he stayed at the most important of these, the monastery of Imati, which housed 3,000 Mahayana monks. When Xuanzang was later traveling through Khotan in the 7th century, he wrote that the king came out to personally greet him at the border of Khotan. He was escorted to the capital and lodged at a monastery of the Sarvastivada sect. Xuanzang records there being about 100 monasteries in Khotan, housing a total of 5,000 monastics who all studied the Mahayana. A manuscript in Tibetan called the Religious Annals of Khotan was found at Dunhuang, and may date to sometime in the 8th century CE. It describes the initial appearance of Buddhism in Khotan, including the 8 major tutelary deities of Khotan, the self-originated bodhisattvas of the country, and a description of the major principles of the Ravakayana and the Mahayana. Though the Mahayana is given preeminence, the Sravakas are depicted as entering the Dharma through the Four Noble Truths, while the Mahayana bodhisattvas are depicted as entering through non-conceptualization and the Urangama Samadhi. After the Tang dynasty, Khotan formed an alliance with the rulers of Dunhuang. Khotan enjoyed close relations with the Buddhist center at Dunhuang. The Khotanese royal family intermarried with Dunhuang elites, visited and patronized Dunhuang's Buddhist temple complex, and donated money to have the portraits painted on the walls of the Mogao grottos. Through the 10th century, Khotanese royal portraits were painted in association with an increasing number of deities in the caves. Khotan's indigenous dynasty governed a fervently Buddhist city-state boasting some 400 temples in the late 9th, early 10th century, 4 times the number recorded by Xuanzang around the year 630 CE. The Buddhist kingdom was independent but was intermittently under Chinese control during the Han and Tang dynasty. Chanchan Buddhism was known to be prevalent in the kingdom of Chanchan. An inscription in the Kharosthi script was found at India, originally written around in the middle of the 3rd century CE. The inscription describes the king of Chanchan as a follower of Mahayana Buddhism, one who has set forth in the Great Vehicle. The king who this refers to was probably Amgoka, who was the most powerful king of Chanchan. According to Richard Salomon, there is every reason to believe that Mahayana Buddhism was prominent in Chanchan at this time and enjoyed royal patronage. More evidence of official adoption of Mahayana Buddhism in Chanchan is seen in a letter inscribed in wood which dates to several decades later. The letter describes the great Kosbo Samasena as one who is beloved of men and gods, honored by men and gods, blessed with a good name, who has set forth in the Mahayana, Persian Buddhism, parts of the Buddhist Indo-Greek kingdom, and its successor, the Buddhist Kushan Empire, in particular Bork, were Persian-speaking. The famous Persian Buddhist monastery in Bork called Navavihara was conquered by Muslims in 663, but continued to function for at least another century within the Abbasid Caliphate. In 715, after an insurrection in Bork was crushed by the Muslims, many Persian Buddhist monks fled up the Silk Road to the Buddhist kingdom of Khotan and further. Several Persian-speaking Buddhist monks, including Inshigao and Bodhidharma, played key roles in the Silk Road transmission of Buddhism and introduction of Buddhism in China. Navavihara's hereditary administrators, the Barmakids, converted converted to Islam after the monastery's conquest and became powerful viziers under the Abbasid caliphs of Baghdad. The last of the family's viziers, Jafar ibn Yahya, is mentioned in the Arabian Nights. In popular culture, Jafar has been associated with a knowledge of mysticism, sorcery, and traditions lying outside the realm of Islam. Muslim mysticism and syncretism continued in Balkh, which was the birthplace of Rumi. Later history. Other religious kings, such as the 16th-century Mongol potentate Altan Khan, invited Buddhist teachers to the realm and proclaimed Buddhism the official creed of the land in order to help unify the people and consolidate the rule. In the process, they may have prohibited certain practices of non-Buddhist, indigenous religions and even persecuted those who followed them. But these heavy-handed moves were primarily politically motivated. Such ambitious rulers never forced the subjects to adopt Buddhist forms of belief or worship. This is not part of the religious creed. Buddhist percentage by country. Below are the percentages of Buddhists in some of the Central Asian countries from many different sources. Bibliography. Klimkate, Hans Joachim. Buddhism in Turkish Central Asia. Newman 37, 53-69. Puri, B.N. Buddhism in Central Asia. Delhi. Motilal Banarsidas. Kudara Kogi, a rough sketch of Central Asian Buddhism, Pacific World 3rd Series 4, 93-107. Kudara Kogi, The Buddhist Culture of the Old Uyghur Peoples, Pacific World 3rd Series 4, 183-195. Halkias, Georgios. When the Greeks converted the Buddha, asymmetrical transfers of knowledge in Indo-Greek cultures. Leiden, Brill, 65-116.